All right, welcome back to part 3 of our 2020 content test enumerator training. This one we're going to cover sections 14 through 23. So basically this will be our livestock sections, and then we'll also cover the production contract section. Just like we did on the previous ones, we'll have a quick overview of each of the sections, kind of what we're asking, what we're looking for, kind of some of the differences, the subtleties in each one of those, and the similarities of how they are to our regular surveys as well. And then once we get through all of those, then we'll jump over to BLES and we'll take a look at each of those sections in BLES as well. All right, so we're going to lead off with section 14. That's going to be our cattle and calves section. If you'll notice, it's fairly similar to our January cattle, the way the inventory questions are arranged. We're asking basically for cattle and calves on hand December 31, 2020. One of the major differences is the other cattle section. You know, in our January or our July cattle, we kind of break that out between steers and heifers and different categories of heifers and calves, bulls, etc. Those here all get lumped into one category. So basically we're asking about beef cows, milk cows, and then all other cattle and calves. After that, we ask about cattle and calves that were sold or moved from this operation during 2020. We break that down by under 500 pounds, over 500 pounds, so that typical breakout that we have on our cattle surveys. But just one thing to note on there where they talk about cattle moved from this operation, that's permanent. So, you know, they've been gone back to the owner, they were wintering them for somebody and they no longer have them, or, you know, whatever the case is, not I still own them and I've taken them to another pasture. You know, that other pasture would more than likely be considered part of the operation. So just don't let that throw you for a loop. And then just like all of our sections, we're going to ask about value of sales. Here we break it out between value of cattle sales and then also milk sales. And then we've got a couple of questions about cattle and feedlots. So it really kind of follows those feedlot or cattle on feed questions that we ask in our regular cattle surveys. All right, and then we get over into hogs and pigs. And so for those of you that just worked on our March hogs, I think you'll see this one is quite a bit shorter than what that is. And then section 16, we get into our equine, our horses, ponies, mules, burros, donkeys, etc. All right. So just like what we did in our cattle, we're going to ask about inventory on the operation. Now, for those of you that have worked on any of our other hog surveys, you know that a lot of times hogs are raised under a contract arrangement. So I might have hogs on my operation that are owned by somebody else, and that's a-okay, because here we're asking about inventory on the operation. Where you do have to be careful is if you're talking to a contractor, so somebody that owns hogs and has them on multiple other people's operations. Make sure that they're not reporting all of the hogs that they own. We only want what's on their operation. All right, so then once we've got that inventory question, which we don't break down by gender, weight classes, anything like that, we ask about sales or moved from the operation. So if they are a contract producer, more than likely they received some sort of a fee for raising those hogs. So they didn't actually sell them. The owner came and took them, you know, whether it was to another farm or to slaughter or whatever, so they were moved off the operation. So really kind of key here, and in several of our other livestock sections, you'll see that terminology, the sold or moved off the operation. So on this very last one, we're asking about the value of hogs sold from the operation. We don't want them to report, you know, the money that they received if they were a contractor for raising those hogs, or for them to approximate the value of the hogs that were moved off the operation. We just want to know really how much was produced and sold. And then last, we're going to ask about type of operation and then whether they were an independent grower, a contractor, or a contract. All right, section 16 is where we get into our equine questions. So you'll see we break this out between horses and ponies, and then mules, burros, and donkeys. We do ask, our horses are split out into two categories: horses owned and horses not owned by the operation, but on the operation. And then for both of those, we do ask total number sold and then gross value of sales. So you're going, well, wait, this could be kind of tricky if they don't actually own the horses. So they've got a boarding or a training operation or, something like that. And we're asking, well, how many were sold and what was the value of those sales? They may very well not know. They may know how many were sold and not the value, vice versa. So put in, if you have to, put in a don't know, put any information in comments. Maybe they think these horses were sold, but they're not sure because they didn't actually own them. They just know that they're not here on the operation anymore. So that can be a little bit tricky. And then we break that. Then our follow-up is any mules, burros, and donkeys. And we do ask about a question for, we ask our gross value of sales. Then we also ask about basically horse-related income. So horse breeding, stud fees, semen, things like that. Be really careful that they don't try to report any boarding or training income. That gets reported in section 33. So here we're really looking for basically income related to horses in addition to their value of sales. All right, and then we get into section 17, which is sheep and goats, and 18, which is aquaculture. All right, and our sheep and goats, this section we break it out fairly similar to what we do on like our July sheep and goat survey. We start out by asking sheep and lambs, and then we ask hair sheep, and then any hair sheep crosses, and then we got a couple different categories for goats as well. And you'll notice here we ask about number owned on December 31, 2020. So in the past, we've been asking about on the operation. Sheep and goats are just a little bit different, where we ask about the number owned. Then we're going to ask about the number sold, moved off the operation, and then gross value of sales. We do then follow up with our wool shorn, how much was sold, what was the value of that. Ask the same questions about mohair, and then we also ask about milk from either sheep or goat and the value of those sales. Section 18, we get into our aquaculture questions, and basically these are farm-raised fish. So if, luck of the draw, you get somebody who's a commercial fisherman, well, we don't want those included. So they basically require, the producer is actually feeding those fish. There's some sort of intervention. They're not just being wild caught or something like that. And generally these are some sort of a controlled environment, whether they're in cages or ponds or controlled water flow areas, things like that. So once we've determined that, yes, they do have raised aquaculture, we're going to ask about the total pounds sold or moved, or the total number of these fish sold or moved, or the total number of aquaculture, and then the gross value of sales. Section 19 takes us up to our poultry questions. And this one we lead off with our gross value of all poultry sales. So a little bit different than what we've seen in our previous sections. So that would include any birds, eggs, etc. So all of those sales would get reported in their very first question. Then we ask end of year inventory and then the total number sold or moved off the operation. For our chickens, we've got about 5 different classes. Turkeys, we've got 3 different classes. And then our all other poultry, which again, you'll have a pick list and you can select what type of poultry those were. And then we ask about any poultry that was hatched on the operation and what those were. All right, so we are just chugging right along. Next up, we're going to ask about our colonies of bees, other livestock, and livestock products. We'll tackle each one of those individually. So section 20 is the colonies of honeybees, fairly similar to what we ask on our bee and honey surveys. We're looking for those colonies currently. We ask about the peak number of colonies. And then, like we do on our fruit surveys, remember how we have bearing and non-bearing acres? Here we're going to ask about the largest number of honey-producing colonies. So some of these could have been, they talk about re-queening them or restocking them. And so maybe that colony isn't quite mature enough to be producing honey that they can harvest. So that's why we break it down. Largest number of colonies, largest number of honey producing colonies. We're going to ask about the total honey collected, regardless of location. So remember, a lot of these bee and honey people are also pollinators. So they travel around with their hives, and so they may have collected honey or harvested honey, pulled off honey in multiple different locations. And so we just want to know about the total honey collected and then also the gross value of honey sales. 21, we get into our other livestock. Basically, here we've got a drop down, and in that drop down, we've got the other livestock, the other livestock as well. So there are some pre-listed in there. We're looking for end of the year inventories, number sold in 2020, and then also the value of sales. So pretty straightforward. You may encounter some stuff in there, like here we got llamas, alpacas, bison, things like that we haven't picked up. And then section 22 is where we get into our livestock products. So here we're just trying to pick up basically everything else. We'll go through an example in Blaze and you can take a little bit better look at that. So not livestock that have been sold, but these livestock products. So things like semen or embryos or furs or pelts, things like that. We're looking for the quantity produced. Also the unit of measure, so you produced 10,000, I don't know, X, Y, and Z, were those by the pound, if you're selling manure, how did you sell that? Was it by the pound, by the ton? So that's what we're looking for in our unit of measure. And then we got our value of sales question. And basically here we're going to pick up anything that hasn't been reported in the previous section. So if somebody reported their milk or their eggs from milk from sheep or from goats or whatever, we wouldn't report that here because that's been reported previously. Anything else would go here. All right, and then our last section that we're going to look at today is there are production contracts and custom feeding. Now, this one, kind of the big thing to remember is there's a difference between production contracts and marketing contracts. So basically, a marketing contract is used a lot of times for crops. Basically, I agree to sell you X number of bushels of corn on XYZ date for XYZ price. Whereas a production contract is a lot more common in livestock production. So if I'm a hog producer and I'm basically raising hogs for the owner. So they come to my farm, I feed them, I get them up to whatever weight that we've agreed on in the contract, and then the owner comes and takes them. So pretty common in hogs and also with broilers, so chickens for slaughter. So we can run into some of those. Now, we may have already picked up those commodities in our sections, because remember, a lot of our sections ask about inventories on the operation at the end of the year, right? So if I'm raising hogs for someone else, I would have reported those hogs in the inventory section. I wouldn't have reported sales, right? Because I didn't sell any of those, or I wouldn't report the value of sales. I'd report the number that were moved off the operation. And then here is where we're going to pick up that information about how much I received for raising those livestock products. All right, so just be careful. Remember the difference between production and marketing contracts. And so we're going to start out, we're going to screen. We've got, oh wow, it's probably 7 or 8 different screening questions in there. We're going to ask about the quantity moved from the operation, so basically raised and then delivered, or that the owner came and took, and then the amount that I received for producing those. Think of this almost like a salary, right? So I raise hogs for somebody and they pay me a fixed rate at the end of when those hogs are mature, and then they take them back. I don't receive the money for the hogs, I'm paid for raising the hogs. We do ask about any inputs that were provided or paid for by the owner or the contractor. So this can really run the gamut. Sometimes with like hogs, chickens, they'll pay for basically everything. Some of our other situations, like maybe with cattle or replacement dairy heifers, the contractee may provide all of the feed, do all of the breeding, provide all of the vet costs, and then they just get a payment back from the contractor when they come to pick up those cattle. And then we are going to ask about the name of the contractor, and this is just to make sure that we haven't double counted. All right, so you're probably wondering what that looks like in Blaze. Well, so am I. Good thing I got that pulled up, and we can jump over there and take a look at it. All right, so I've jumped us through everything. We're at section 14. That's our cattle and calves section. And just like we've done in all our previous ones, I'm going to put data into all of the sections. Again, pretty unlikely that you'll have somebody that's got something in all of the livestock sections, but for the sake of our demo, we're just going to go through all of them. All right, so did I have any cattle on this operation? We're going to say yes. All right, so first we ask about our beef cows. Let's give our farmer about 35 beef cows. Any milk cows? Nope, don't have any of them. And then our other cattle, right? So that's everything lumped into that group, whether they're steers, heifers, bulls, going for slaughter, not going for slaughter. We'll say about 75 there. So then Blaze calculates our total for us. We're going to say, yep, that 110 is correct. How many calves were sold that were less than 500 pounds? I'm going to say we sold 15 during 2020. And any calves weighing, or cattle or calves that were over 500 pounds, and we're going to say we sold about 32. What was the value of those cattle sales? So let's say about $50,000. And value of our milk sales, well, even though we don't currently have any milk cows on December 31, we could have had milk cows during the year, but I didn't, and so we're going to say nothing for milk sales. And then we're going to ask about cattle on feed, and so these would be that are being fed a ration that'll get them up to a slaughter weight. And I'm going to say we've got about 20 cattle on feed. And how many of the cattle that were sold during 2020 went directly to the slaughter market from my feedlot? And I will say about 25 of those. All right, that takes us through our cattle section. And now we're going to ask about hogs or pigs. Yes, I did have some hogs or pigs. Total number on the operation, let's say 500. How many hogs were sold or moved off the operation? Now, for the purposes of our example here, I'm going to be a contractee, so I don't actually own these hogs. But during 2020, I got about 1,000 of them that went back to the contractor, and so they were moved off my operation. Gross value of hogs and pigs sold from the operation. Now, in this case, that's going to be a 0 for me, right? Because they were produced under a production contract. Type of operation, I am just a finish only, so I get hogs at like about 40 pounds and then raise them up to about 220 or 250 a slaughter weight. And what best describes me? Well, I am a contract grower, so I'm raising pigs for somebody else. Did you or anybody else have horses, ponies, mules, burros, or donkeys? So our equine section, and I'm going to say yes, I did. How many horses and ponies do I own? Let's say 5. My daughter would be tickled. How many were sold or moved off this operation? Well, I sold one horse this year. What was the value of that horse that I sold? That was about $5,000. And then we ask about horses and ponies not owned by this operation, but still here on the operation. So if I was boarding them or training them or, whatever, I'm going to say we've got 3. And total number of horses and ponies that were sold off this operation. This year, we'll say a couple of our boarders sold 2 horses. And then what was the value of those sales? I'm going to say I don't know because my boarders sold them. I don't know what they sold them for. Now we get our mules, burros, donkeys. I'm going to say 0 on there. And then here's where we get into our other equine fees, so horse breeding, stud fees, any semen, things like that. And remember, I said I board horses, right? Would we report that here? No, we wouldn't. But I did actually have a horse that I used for breeding, and last year I made about $1,500 off of him. All right. Any sheep, lambs, goats, or kids owned during 2020? I'm going to say yes, I sure did. How many were owned on December 31? And notice this is regardless of location, so a little bit different than some of our other livestock sections. And I'm going to say I've got about, let's say 50 sheep. How many were sold or moved off the operation in 2020? Let's say about 30. What did I get for those? Let's say about, I don't know, $10,000. Any hair sheep or wool hair crosses? I'm going to say nope. And any goats or kids? This is where we break in our 3 classes. So the questions are basically the same as our sheep ones. So I'm going to say no, I didn't have any Angora goats. I didn't sell any Angora goats. And again, just because I don't have any now doesn't mean I didn't sell any in 2020. Milk goats and kids, none, no sales. And then meat and other goats. So just like we ask on our regular January sheep and goat survey, I'm going to say none and no sales. Then we get into our wool. How many pounds of wool shorn in 2020? Let's say about 500 pounds. And that is, total pounds. Total amount sold. That was all 500 pounds, but I only got about $100 for it. Any milk sales from sheep or goats? I'm going to say no. All right, and then we get into our aquaculture, and I'm going to say yes here just to pop that open so we can take a quick look at it. These are our screening questions. I'm going to say yes, I had some catfish. Total pounds or the total number sold, and I'm going to say that we sold about 8,000 pounds of catfish this year, and those were farm raised. I've got a catfish pond that we harvest and then sell the catfish out of. And how much did I sell those for? About $12,000. All right, and then all of the rest of these questions are the same, so we're just going to dummy in a no into those since we've already seen one example. All right, and then this calculates up my total, and I'm going to say yes, that is correct for my aquaculture sales. And then we get into our poultry section. I'm going to say yes, we did have some poultry. Gross value of sales, remember this one a little bit differently. We lead off with that. And I'll say, this year we sold about $2,000 worth of chicken and eggs. Now, what kind of poultry did you have? Again, these are all the same, so I'm just going to say that I had some chickens and broilers on hand. Let's say I got about 500 of those currently, and then I also sold about 500 this year. Layers, I had about 100 on hand currently, and I didn't sell any layers over the course of the year. And hatching layers, so basically these are chickens that are laying eggs to be hatched. I'm going to say none, no sales. Hatching layers for table eggs, so basically the chickens that are going to produce the chickens that are going to produce the eggs. I'm going to say none of those, none of those. How many pullets for laying flock replacement? So I had about 20. So these would be going to replace these layers up here. And I didn't sell or move any off the operation. All right, and then the exact same questions for the other types of poultry. Poultry hatched on the operation. I'm going to say this year we did hatch about 500. And what were those? Those were those broilers that I'm currently raising. All right, and then we get into our honeybees, and I'm going to say yes, I did have some honeybees. So current inventory, so December 31, how many did I have? I had 30 hives. Largest number of colonies owned, I had 30. And largest number of honey producing colonies, well, I renovated a few this year, and so really I only had about 25 that were producing honey this year. How much honey was collected or pulled off of those hives? Let's say about 500 pounds, and I made about $1,500 selling my honey this year. All right, any other livestock on the operation? I'm going to say yes, I sure did. And what were those? Let's say those were some alpacas. All right, how many did I have? I had 3. How many did I sell? 1. Value of sales, well, alpacas, not a big market for them, so $500. All right, and then any other livestock products on the operation? I'm going to say yes. I did produce a few embryos, so my beef cows, I flushed some of those for their embryos and sold them. And how many of those did I sell? I sold, let's say about 100 embryos this year. And unit of production, I'm just going to say an embryo. So I sold 100 embryos. And what did I make for those? Let's say about $5,000. Oops, $5,000. All right, and then now our very last section that we want to cover today is our production contracts and custom feeding. And so I'm going to say yes, I did have some animals on the operation that I did not own. And what were those? Well, those were those hogs. Remember, we had talked about them. And how many hogs were raised or delivered in 2020 under production contract? So if you remember back in the hog section, I said about 1,000 had been moved off my operation. And how much did I get? So basically, this is my salary that I got for raising those hogs. Let's say about $15,000. And what did the contractor provide? So the contractor provided the animals, and he also provided the feed, and he also provided, or they also provided the veterinary services, and that was it. Everything else, all the other expenses, I provided. And the name of the contractor, again, this is just to make sure that we haven't double counted anything. It's going to be Big Pig Incorporated. All right, and we're going to stop there. So come on back for part 4, and we'll go through the rest of the questionnaire on that. All right, thanks.